Welcome to Intentionality with Paul Kempf, the podcast where we explore the possibilities and opportunities that can be created with a more intentional life. We release an episode every Wednesday, once a week. If you like what you hear, please hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Please follow us on social media and share the link to this podcast with your family and friends so we can impact more lives. This is episode 11, and today I want to do some reflection on the previous 10 episodes. I want to talk about some changes that we want to make to the podcast, and I want to discuss the topic of mindset and the power of the right mindset with you today. If we reflect on the first 10 episodes, we talked about intentionality with your finances, being more intentional with your money. From episode 11, I want to move on to a next topic. If you look at the TV screen, you will see the subtitle on the podcast is Mind, Money, Life. We've done the money part. Let's talk about the mind part a bit in the next few episodes. Let's focus on a more intentional mindset and what a more intentional mindset can do for you in terms of your life. Now, before we get to the changes I want to make to this podcast, I just want to say thank you to all of the supporters out there, to everybody that listens to this podcast, to those of you that are subscribing, that are following on not just the podcast, but also the YouTube channel. Thank you for all the recommendations. Thank you for all the suggestions in terms of how to do things better going forward. I know this sounds weird, but I even want to thank everybody that has sent me some criticism on how we have done things in the first 10 episodes. And yes, I think criticism is important. And interestingly enough, the biggest critic of this first 10 episodes is myself. I went and I listened to those first 10 episodes again, and I must be honest with you, I wasn't entirely happy with the way we did things. And that's why I'm very intentional, very determined to do things better in the next few episodes. And speaking of criticism, a short while ago, a good friend of mine, Fani, sent me a video. And this video really made me think about my own criticism of the first 10 episodes and what we did in those 10 episodes. And I just want to share some excerpts from this video with you today, because I think it's a very powerful video with some very powerful lessons. Now, the video starts off with a teacher in front of his class of students, and the teacher is writing on the blackboard one equation after another. And he eventually ends up writing 10 equations. These are pretty easy equations. The first 9 is done 100% correctly. And then when he writes down the 10th equation, he actually does it incorrectly. He writes the wrong answer. And the students then start laughing at him. And he asks them, "Why are you laughing at me?" And they say, "Well, you're not supposed to make a mistake. You're supposed to be smarter than us." And that's where he says to them, "Yes, I might be in a position of authority, and yes, I'm probably supposed to be smarter than you, but I'm also a human being, and human beings make mistakes." And I just want to read to you quickly this excerpt from this video about what this teacher says to his class next, because I really think there are some valuable lessons to be learned. What he says is, the world is quick to criticize and find fault, much slower to praise and find the positive. You will all experience criticism in your life. If you become more successful, you will experience more criticism. People love pointing out the mistakes of people who have achieved more than them. The person who criticizes is often only revealing the lack within themselves. Those who are happy with themselves need not point out the faults in others. There are 3 valuable lessons to be learned in this video. First, try to notice the good in others. If someone makes a mistake, try and let them know in a kind way. Be frequent with your praise and thoughtful in your criticism. Second, when you are criticized, remember the good in you. Remember you are worthy and that you are capable of great things. And finally, remember criticism is something you can avoid easily by doing nothing, by saying nothing, and by being nothing. So please, dream big, get out there, live your life, see how far you can push the limits. Don't fear criticism. And know when it comes, it is the result of your successes and not your failures. Be the person who encourages others, who chooses to see the good in the world and to speak it out loud. I think that's a wonderful message to keep in mind. So let's talk about changes. There's a lot of things I want to change about this podcast from the first 10 episodes. And if you're listening or watching on the YouTube channel, you would have probably seen some of the changes already. I've decided to wear my glasses for today's episode and not my contact lenses. We've changed the look and feel of the podcast. You can see on the screen behind me here the new colors, the new font we're using. If you look at the cup, you will see there the old font that we used before. We've decided to change it to make it more legible on the small screen, on a phone, on the podcast platforms. I've decided to play around a bit with my talking speed, to try and be more natural, to be less formal. I definitely want to look as if I'm having more fun. I think some of those first episodes I was struggling with the fun part a bit. And make no mistake, this is a lot of fun for me. I'm having the time of my life because I'm living the dream. I'm doing something that I want to do. But most importantly, I really want to focus on the content and the value that I can bring to you in the next few episodes. I want to do better, but very importantly, better does not necessarily mean perfect. I personally think it's better to do something imperfectly than doing nothing perfectly. That's a quote by Robert Schuller. I also think it's important to really push yourself. Sometimes you need to push yourself if something scares you, if you're uncomfortable, if you think you're not yet ready. That's what I did with this podcast. I started this podcast probably at a time when I wasn't 100% ready to do it. But I started it specifically because it was something that I really wanted to do, and I knew I had to get started despite the fear, despite the uncertainty. I had a similar experience last year when I applied to do a TEDx talk in Pretoria. I submitted an application, I submitted a video, and I wasn't selected. I didn't make the cut. It was very disappointing initially. But when I attended this TEDx event towards the end of 2023, I suddenly realized it might not have been a bad thing that I did not get selected. I simply wasn't ready to do that TEDx talk. I needed more time to prepare. And I think this podcast really gives me the opportunity to hone my skills, to be better prepared the next time that I apply to go and do a TEDx talk. Because that is something that I am still going to do, something that I still want to do in my life. As I said, I'm still living the dream. I'm still doing what I can to make a difference in the lives of people, to add value. In episode 1, I told you about the ultimate goal that I have for this podcast, and that is to create a collective of intentional people that can have an impact worldwide. In short, I'm looking for a better attitude from myself, more purpose, and more commitment. I want to be more deliberate. And by the way, there you have the definition of the word intentionality again. An attitude of purposefulness with a commitment to deliberate action. That brings us to the actual topic of this podcast for today. Do any of you know what the link is between thoracic surgery, hotel housekeepers, and milkshakes? I know that sounds strange, but there is a link. And if you actually do know what the link between those three topics are, you've probably seen the TEDx talk of Dr. Alia Crum, a TEDx talk about the power of mindset. And in this talk, she talks about 3 studies that were done. These 3 studies had to do with thoracic surgery, hotel housekeepers, and milkshakes. Let me quickly explain. In the first study, patients that had undergone thoracic surgery were split into 2 groups. The first group of patients were given morphine through a drip. Now, as I understand it, thoracic surgery is quite painful. The recovery process is quite painful. The patients go through a lot of pain. And in that first group, the patients were not told that they were being given morphine. The second group of patients, a doctor went to the patient, told the doctor they were going to give the morphine, and clearly showed the patient when they were injecting the morphine. Very importantly, in the study, both these groups of patients received exactly the same amount of morphine. The difference was the first group didn't know they were getting the morphine. The second group actually knew they were getting the morphine. And then what they did is they monitored the pain levels of these patients over time. And the fascinating thing about the study was the patients that didn't know that they were getting the morphine reported significantly higher pain levels than the patients who knew they were getting the morphine. The fact that their mind was telling them that they had received morphine reduced the pain significantly compared to the patients that didn't know they were getting the morphine. The second study was done on a group of hotel housekeepers. They again split the housekeepers into two groups. The first group, they showed a 15-minute video to, where they explained the benefits of the work that they do. That the work they were doing was actually good for them physically. It was like exercise. And then what they did is they measured certain metrics of both these groups. The first group that had been shown the video and the second group that didn't get to see the video. They simply did their work. The metrics they measured was blood pressure, weight, body fat percentage, and overall satisfaction with work. And then 4 weeks later, they went back to these two groups of hotel housekeepers. They measured the metrics again. And surprise, surprise, the group of hotel housekeepers that were shown the 15-minute video about how good their work was for them physically showed significantly lower blood pressure, lower weight, lower body fat percentage, and a substantially higher work satisfaction level than the group of housekeepers that won't show the video. Again, the power of a mindset. And then the final, but my favorite study, the one about milkshakes. In this study, they took a group of students from a university and they asked these students to drink a milkshake. Now, this milkshake, they were told, was the most fattening milkshake you can find. Massively high in calories, sugar content, really, really unhealthy for you. They then took a blood sample from the students and measured the ghrelin levels in their blood. Now, for those of you who don't know, ghrelin is known as the hunger hormone. It's a peptide that's secreted in your gut that tells your body when it's hungry. And then when you get food in, when you get calories into your gut, it tells your body's metabolism to speed up so that you can burn fat. In the second week of the study, they took the same students and asked them to drink a different milkshake. This time, the milkshake was very low in calories, very low in sugar content, really healthy. So first week, very unhealthy shake. Second week, a very healthy shake. They again drew the blood, they measured the ghrelin levels, and as was expected, in the first week, the students' ghrelin levels were significantly lower because they had drank a milkshake with a lot of calories. The surprising result of the study was the two milkshakes were exactly the same. No difference in calories, no difference in sugar content. So how was it possible that the students in the first week had substantially lower ghrelin levels? Simply the power of their mind. I think these three studies perfectly illustrates the power of a mindset and how it can help you to have a more intentional, more successful, more satisfying life. And that brings me to the book recommendation for this week. My tip of the week is go and read the book Mindset by the author Dr. Carol S. Dweck. I'm currently reading that book, and it is fascinating to hear the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset, and how having a growth mindset can significantly increase the intentionality with which you can live your life. That brings us to the end of episode 11 of this podcast. I want to thank my production team for the hard work behind the scenes in getting everything ready, all of the changes that we wanted to make to this podcast. Thank you for all your efforts. I want to thank FFG again for their support of this podcast. I truly believe that this journey will be one in which we can create memories and create something meaningful over time. My next target for this podcast is to get to 20 episodes. I recently read that 90% of all podcasts started worldwide does not even get past episode 3. And of the 10% that gets past episode 3, only 10% makes it past episode number 20. 20. So if we can get to 20 episodes, we can already be in the top 1% of all podcasts worldwide. So that's the target. Let's get to 20 episodes. Something else we've changed is the email address where you can get hold of me. The previous one was far too long. The new email address where you can send me messages, get hold of me, is paul@iwpk.co.za. Those of you that have listened to the first 10 episodes, that have listened to this episode, thank you. If you feel that you are not yet quite there in terms of your intentional journey, you're still struggling with certain aspects of your life in being more intentional, don't worry. I've got a great episode lined up in episode number 13, where I will be giving you 10 tools to live a more intentional life. 10 tools I use in my life to be more intentional. All that's left now is for you to congratulate yourself for making the choice to listen to this podcast and living a more intentional life. To be the architect of your life, the architect of your success, and not to just let your life happen to you. May you have a wonderful, amazing, intentional week. Thank you.